Hello and welcome to Criminal History. If you like the video, please like, subscribe and comment.
Indeed, Bundy's murders, those for which he is being executed, there are 3, and at least 20 others to which he has confessed, have made his execution a rather popular event.
From his birth in 1946, Ted Bundy himself was a shameful secret. His 22-year-old mother, Louise, who would have been shamed for having a child out of wedlock, kept him a secret. It has never been revealed who the father was, but nefarious speculations have since gained popularity. For example, it has been speculated that his real biological father was also his grandfather. In order to protect the family honour and prevent shame being brought upon them, Ted was told his granddad and grandmother were his parents, as were the neighbours. His real mother would live alongside him as his sister. When he was 4, he and his mother, who he believed was his sister, left the family home. Louise had met and married a military cook named Johnny Bundy in Tacoma, Washington. This is where and how the notorious name Ted Bundy was born. Little did anyone know that the whole world would one day know his name. He would become the most famous, charismatic and viciously brutal serial killer the world had ever known, challenging the idea of what and how a killer acted and looked like. As a child, he had a better life than most serial killers. He was not the most popular kid at school, but skirted around the edges of popularity. However, there was an air of oddness about him that he was teased for. However, he was far from being bullied. Mainly, he was a reserved and quiet person that did not seem overly enthusiastic about socialising with others. Bundy's grandfather, Samuel, was allegedly an incredibly violent man. This was stated by Ted Bundy's aunt. It has also been alleged that his grandfather may have abused him. This was speculated by Stephen Michaud in the Netflix docuseries Conversations with a Killer. However, there is little to prove this, and Ted vehemently denied anything like this. It certainly would give a better explanation as to why he became a violent killer, but perhaps it is just a way for people to find reason for the unbelievable. It seems too unreal to believe that Bundy would have a relatively normal, healthy childhood and become such a vicious killer. Perhaps he was born genetically the perfect, cold-hearted psychopath. It has been shown that brain abnormalities, especially in the prefrontal cortex, can eliminate fear and empathy. Like many psychopaths, he also harmed animals from an early age. This included frogs, mice and cats. Allegedly, he did not discover the truth about his real mother until he was a teenager, even though he had been living with who he thought was his sister. It is alleged he found a birth certificate at that age and found out the truth. From there, he grew to believe his whole existence was shameful. He had no sense of who he was, and his whole existence had been a lie. A lie so shameful it was hidden from the world. Perhaps when he lost this illusion of motherly love, he gained a hatred and callous disregard for women. However, later on in his life, he redacted that claim. He said he had always known in his heart that his sister was really his mother because of the huge age difference and how she treated him. He also claimed finding out the secret had no effect on him whatsoever. However, this is incredibly hard to believe that this did not have a psychological impact. As a teen, he began to be involved in petty crime such as small burglaries. This is one of the hallmarks of psychopathy, taking advantage and stealing when an opportunity presents itself, and the diversity of the crimes they commit. Psychopaths are simply fearless and moralless when committing crime from an early age. He also began to commit acts of voyeurism, sneaking around and trying to spy on neighbours undressing. Also, one of the creepier episodes of his childhood involved his aunt. While she slept, a 3-year-old Ted Bundy surrounded her body with knives. When she awoke, Ted was stood smiling at her. In 1966, he would begin his studies at the University of Washington in Seattle. This is where he began to reinvent himself, dressing immaculately and developing a charming persona to become popular. Superficial charm is another key indicator of psychopathy. Incredibly, Ted Bundy worked at a suicide prevention hotline, using his skills of persuasion to stop people from taking their own lives. However, this was the perfect illusionary suit of armour to protect him from suspicion when he began to commit heinous crimes. It was also whilst at university he met his first love, a rich and beautiful woman named Diane Edwards, who dumped him. Some say this would later set him off on his murderous rampage, as one of the reasons his girlfriends ended things with him was because he had no drive or future vision for success. This was a real sting to the ego of Bundy, who was a psychopath and also had narcissistic traits. Narcissists, although appearing ultra-confident, are also severely insecure. The outward confidence is often a shield to hide this insecurity. After the rejection, he then began to focus heavily on his career. He focused on law and politics, and many saw him as a future politician within the Republican Party. Such was his success that he won her back in 1974, and the two began contemplating marriage. However, after all that effort to get her back, he left her without warning. It would seem that he never truly loved her, and his true goal in winning her back was revenge, to gain her love and leave her grieving the loss of a failed relationship. It also helped re-enshrine his ego and his personal belief that he was special. His first known attack was against a University of Washington dance major student named Karen Sparks. She was far from an easy target, as she had 3 male housemates that would likely have protected her at all costs. He beat her with a metal bar and sexually assaulted her. Luckily, she survived and had no memory of the ordeal. However, she was left with devastating injuries. She had 50% hearing loss and 40% vision loss, and her bladder was split. This also ended her dance career, which robbed her not only of her senses, but her passion and career aspirations. In February 1974, it was discovered that 21-year-old Linda Ann Healy had disappeared from her house. This was his first known killing. Then more and more female students would start disappearing thereafter. Donna Manson, 19, vanished on her way to a concert. Susan Rancourt, 18, disappeared whilst walking to her college campus. She was one of the few blonde victims of Ted Bundy. 22-year-old Roberta Parks was next to go missing, disappearing from Oregon State University. Another 22-year-old named Brenda Ball also vanished when she left the Flame Tavern pub in Seattle. An 18-year-old student named Georgian Hawkins also disappeared around the same time. She was just 50 feet from her dorm when she was taken and murdered. Similarities in the features of the women became apparent. Each of the women were young, well-educated, pretty brunettes, usually with a long centre parting. It has been speculated that each of these women resembled his first love, the one who left him because he was not good enough for her. It has been speculated that these were revenge attacks against a particular type of women he likened to his ex-partner who had humiliated him. In a 1-year period, 6 women disappeared without a trace, without the whisper of evidence. The kidnapper began to be known as the campus killer in the media. Also, during this time, he had another unlikely yet protective shield of a job. He was the assistant director of the Seattle Crime Prevention Advisory Commission. Whilst there, he even wrote a rape prevention pamphlet. In many ways, Bundy was like an evil genius, the definition of a psychopath. He felt no fear or remorse and was a master manipulator. It was later revealed that he scored 39 out of 40 on the Hare psychopathy checklist. This was seen when one of his kidnapping techniques were revealed. In Lake Sammamish, Washington, he brazenly attempted several kidnaps on a hot summer day, heaving with tourists and people out enjoying the weather. He wore a fake cast, feigning vulnerability. He asked for help to retrieve something from his car as he seemingly couldn't manage it with one arm. He finally lured a 23-year-old victim named Janice Ott by asking her if she could help him lift his canoe down from his car. This was the last time she was seen. When he got her to his car, he knocked her out with a crowbar and pushed her into his VW Bug car. This car was modified for kidnap. It had the front passenger seat removed so he could quickly push a victim into his car. However, a whole park full of witnesses saw the man in the cast. 2 students even reported to police that they saw him in a sling and asked them for help. They also described his tan Volkswagen Beetle. Incredibly, hours later he returned to the same spot. This time he kidnapped Denise Naslund using the same technique. She had only briefly left the security of her boyfriend to use the bathroom. This was all it took for the predator to pounce on her. This showed his absolute lack of fear of being caught and the acceleration of his crimes. He seemingly had an endless bloodlust, much like a junkie chasing a fix. However, his brazen lack of fear exposed him to being caught. Some 40,000 people had visited the park that day, and many witnesses saw him. He even used his real name, Ted. A composite sketch was drawn up, but it must be said it was not a great resemblance. However, his girlfriend, Elizabeth Klopfer, and a former colleague named Anne Rule gave Ted Bundy's name to the police as he matched the description. However, Bundy was quickly ruled out as a suspect. Bundy was able to hide behind a veil of normalcy and respectability, especially in the field of work he was in. Many people let their biases cloud their judgment. No one thought a charming, middle-class, average-looking man that worked at a suicide hotline could be a cold-blooded serial killer. In September 1974, he moved across country, making it harder for police to track him. He moved to Salt Lake City, to study at the University of Utah. From the moment he moved, a familiar pattern began to emerge. Young females began to disappear. In only 4 months, 4 girls were found raped and murdered. He even killed the daughter of a Utah police chief named Melissa Smith. In November of that year, more of his devious manipulation methods were revealed. He approached a woman named Carol DaRonch, pretending to be a police officer. Interestingly, obedience experiments have shown the majority of people will obey the demands of an authority figure. He told her that someone had attempted to steal her car and led her to his Volkswagen car where he would drive her to the police station. He even had a fake police badge that he showed her. As they were driving, he attempted to handcuff her, pulling a gun. However, he only managed to get the cuffs on one arm as she fought back. She scratched him fiercely, breaking her nails off in the process. Then she bravely jumped out of the moving vehicle and escaped. Interestingly enough, Debbie Harry, the lead singer of Blondie, also claimed she escaped a kidnapping by Ted Bundy in New York in the 1970s. However, despite this close call, he did not slow down at all. In 7 months, he kidnapped 6 more women in Utah and Colorado. His girlfriend also gave his name to police for a second time. She was even interviewed at this time, but he was not even brought in for questioning. He was finally pulled over by police while driving his notorious Volkswagen. In the car, they found what they believed were burglary tools and charged him with attempted burglary. In reality, what they found was his murder kit. This included a ski mask or balaclava, another mask, a rope, handcuffs, gloves, a torch and an ice pick. However, police realised that this car matched the description of the attempted kidnap of DaRonch. After his arrest, pieces of puzzles began to connect and the police began to suspect he was a serial killer. For example, his name was flagged up and guides and brochures to locations of crime scenes were found. However, he was released on 24-hour surveillance because there was not enough evidence to charge him. His former girlfriend was again questioned. She explained that she had seen suspicious items in the house, including crutches, plaster of Paris, surgical gloves, a meat cleaver, a knife he kept in the glove compartment, and a sack of female clothes. Carol DaRonch was also brought in to identify Bundy. The brave Carol DaRonch, who had escaped his clutches, picked him out in a lineup as a man who had tried to kidnap her. He was then charged and sentenced for the kidnap. They believed he was the man responsible for several disappearances. However, at this time he was sentenced to 1 to 15 years for the kidnap. While serving time, he was placed in solitary confinement after a presumed attempted escape. He was found hiding in the prison yard with several items including road maps, airline schedules and a social security card. He was transported to Colorado to face charges for the abduction and murder of 24-year-old Karen Campbell in 1976. However, little did anyone know he would not serve that sentence. Like a true psychopathic predator, he would take any risk, no matter how large or small, no matter how short the window of opportunity to escape. The trial would take place in Aspen. He requested that he defend himself in court, and so he was allowed access to the law library. On the 7th of June 1977, during a recess in the case, he jumped out of the window of the law library and escaped. This underlines his lack of fear and impulsivity as a psychopath. He saw an opening to escape and took it immediately without even considering the consequences. Bundy was then back out in society, hiding out in the mountains like a predator waiting to pounce. The Aspen Alps provided exceptional cover for the escaped killer. He was able to hide out in the wilderness and break in to abandoned cabins for shelter and food. Incredibly, he willingly gave up his cover by returning to Aspen Town. There, he stole a car in hopes of escape. However, he ran straight into a police roadblock. After he spun round and tried to drive away, he was chased and arrested. He was then transported back to Colorado, and despite the raised security levels, Bundy hatched a devious escape plan. He identified that there was a space above and behind a neon light fixture in the cell after managing to get hold of prison floor plans. The gap would take him to the roof. He also managed to get hold of a hacksaw blade which he would use to saw through the ceiling. Again, showing his instinct for survival and escape at all costs, he instantly started to prepare for escape. He lost massive amounts of weight to shrink his body to skeletal proportions. After this, he slid like a snake through the gap which took him into the jailer's home. He stole clothing, and from there he fled again to cause perhaps his most ruthless string of murders. Bundy wasted no time in escaping. He had already fled to Chicago when he was noticed missing. Much like an escape from Alcatraz, he had stuffed his bed to make it look like he was sleeping. This gave him enough time to escape to Chicago, 1,000 miles away. He then bust his way to Tallahassee, Florida. It seemed he had already picked his next hunting ground as he rented a room at the Oak Boarding House, a building surrounded by sorority houses. 1 week later, in January 1978, he was back to killing despite being on the run. He was seen by returning housemate Nita Neary fleeing the Chi Omega sorority house at around 3 o'clock in the morning. Fleeing into the shadows carrying a weapon like Jack the Ripper or a vampire-like figure. A horrifying visage also emerged when Karen Chandler also came out of her room covered in blood. She had survived a vicious beating from Bundy, walking out to Nita with a broken jaw, a broken arm, a crushed finger and missing teeth. However, she was far from the only victim. It seemed Bundy had went on a savage rampage throughout the house, first clubbing and strangling Margaret Bowman with a nylon stocking. Lisa Levy was also found murdered. It was found that she had been sexually assaulted with an object and beaten. Bundy had also left deep bite marks in her like an animal and tore off a nipple. Karen Chandler and Kathy Kleiner were also clubbed, barely surviving the ordeal. The way he approached this event shows his callous lack of remorse. However, it shows a stronger psychopathic trait, a complete lack of fear. He had no fear whatsoever about going into a house full of people and murdering each resident, room by room, armed with nothing but a club. Quite easily, he could have been overpowered, met with a gun, a boyfriend, or a loud commotion could have alerted the police or neighbours. However, he methodically and without regard for the consequences entered the house, devoid of fear and devoid of emotion, almost robotically killing driven by nothing but lust and rage. He even attacked Cheryl Thomas that same night, breaking into her apartment. She was severely beaten but thankfully survived. She also had a broken jaw, along with skull fractures and a dislocated shoulder. Her permanent injuries also meant that she also had to give up her dancing career. 3 weeks later, he stole a white Dodge van and drove 100 miles to Lake City. This is where he committed his most vile murder, one even he claimed to be ashamed of. He kidnapped a 12-year-old named Kimberly Leach. Sadly, she was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Forgetting her PE kit, she was allowed to return to her homeroom and get it. This is where she was snatched by Bundy and thrown into the van. 2 months later, her body was found in a disused pig pen, 25 miles away from her home. Because he had forced himself on her, this also makes him a child predator along with being a serial killer. A lot of films and TV shows and even true crime fans like to glamorise Ted Bundy as some kind of charming apex predator. However, this murder is often conveniently left out. This is because harming children is such an unforgivable crime that it tarnishes any kind of positive image he may project. Even the most hardened criminals have a zero tolerance policy on harming children, and vigilante punishment is often dished out in prison. Bundy refused to talk about this killing, and it also gives clues into previous crimes he refused to talk about. It seems he may have been rightly ashamed of being a child predator, or he may have been aware that this is a crime so despised that it would ruin his legacy as a serial killer.
I can't really talk about that right now. That's weird.
That's too painful.
I would like to be able to convey to you what that experience is like, but I can't. I won't be able to talk about that.
Okay.
Bundy again was stopped by police whilst driving a car suspiciously. It was also found to be a stolen car. After warning shots were fired, Bundy continued to run and he was tackled and apprehended. This time he would not escape, but the circus continued. It is also surprising and frightening that he only really ever got caught by chance. There was never a huge amount of evidence other than witnesses. For example, he never left a single fingerprint in all his killings. In court, he would represent himself, sparking a media whirlwind. This was the first time ever a US court case would be televised nationally. And, much like the recent Depp vs Heard court case, there was a media frenzy. This also turned Bundy into a celebrity of sorts. His disarming appearance made many doubt his guilt initially. He was not the image they had in their minds as a serial killer. Instead, he was quite ordinary. It has been said that he was handsome, but I don't see where they are getting this from. Instead, I believe the truly scary thing is that he was so normal looking. He could blend in easily as the average man. No features that made him stand out, just an unassuming figure. It was perhaps his superficial charm and manipulation that stood out the most, two defining characteristics of psychopathy. It has to be said that Bundy had many groupies who fell in love with him and would often pack out the court. This was due to a condition known as hybrostophilia, which is an irrational attraction to men often in prison, who commit crimes. Often these are violent, sickening crimes like murder.
I'm not afraid of him. He just doesn't look like the type to kill somebody. You try to imagine yourself in his place and to see how he's feeling, looking at the pillows with blood stains and everything, if he really did it or not.
Although there was no doubt he was guilty, he confidently defended himself with a fair degree of adequacy. Defending himself also allowed him to fulfill his urge for control and narcissism, thrusting himself into the spotlight. This also meant he could cross-examine witnesses and survivors. Perhaps this was a way for him to further twist the knife and get a thrill from causing more pain. In a shocking twist, he even proposed to a former colleague and former partner named Carol Ann Boone while she was giving evidence.
Carol, do you want to marry me? And I want to marry you. And I do want to marry you.
Boone was a former work associate who had long been enamoured by Bundy. US law allowed the proposal to be accepted when she said yes, as it was made in court. She believed in his innocence right up until his later confession, despite mountains of evidence. Also, he allegedly impregnated her whilst on death row, and together they had a little girl named Rose. Bundy was offered a plea deal for a 75-year sentence, which he rejected. Instead, he faced the death penalty. Carol DeRonch was able to identify him, as were moulds of his teeth from the biting attack at the sorority house. Of course, he was found guilty and sentenced to death by electric chair. This is when the judge, Edward Cowart, made one of the most despicable statements ever uttered when describing a serial killer. He first described the crimes as extremely wicked, shockingly evil and vile. This was later the title for a Ted Bundy film starring Zac Efron, which again seemed to promote the image of a handsome, charming celebrity killer. The judge then said to Ted,
"Take care of yourself, young man."
Thank you.
I say that to you sincerely. Take care of yourself. It's a tragedy for this court to see such a total waste, I think, of humanity that I've experienced in this court. You're a bright young man. If you made a good lawyer, I'd love to have you practice in front of me, but you went another way, partner.
I believe these statements by the judge are disgusting. Incredibly, Bundy was almost able to escape again. He was discovered with a hacksaw blade in his cell, and he had sawn off parts of a window bar, gluing it back in place. He did not admit to his guilt right up until the night of his execution. He held onto that power of knowledge right up until the final moments. When he finally confessed, he admitted to killing at least 30 women. However, as with most serial killers, the actual body count is likely to be much higher than that. Some estimates believe he may have killed hundreds. It was only hours before his execution that he gave a full confession explaining his motives. He claimed that a pornography addiction sparked his lust for murder. However, the interviewer was himself an outspoken critic of pornography, so he likely suggested this motive to suit his own agenda and for Bundy to minimise his guilt.
And it happens, it happened in stages, gradually. It doesn't necessarily, not to me at least, happen overnight. My experience with enlightenment, until you reach the point where the pornography only goes so far. You reach that jumping off point where you begin to wonder if maybe actually doing it will give you that which is beyond just reading about it or looking at it.
However, Bundy was a notorious liar. He also previously explained his thrill of murder and the power he felt In a chilling quote, he stated, "When you feel the last breath leaving their body, you're looking into their eyes. A person in that situation is God." This is why many classify him as a power control serial killer rather than a lust killer. As stated by criminology professor Scott Bond in Psychology Today, even the sexual element to his crimes was about power. He loved the domination of it. He also would revisit the bodies to commit sexual acts. He enjoyed being able to do whatever he wanted with them without resistance. He also removed their heads, taking them home as a trophy to commit sexual acts. He also took jewellery from victims and gave them to his girlfriends so he could fantasize about murder whilst being with them. He also took bodies back to his apartment to reenact sexual scenes from crime magazines. Bundy believed he was possessing his victims in death. To Inspector General Paul Decker, who asked him why he did it, he simply replied that he liked it.